morning, everybody. It's Monday. Hope the week is starting off well. So we've been talking about the oral Torah because it's the month of Sivan, the last few days of Sivan, and it's the month of Torah. And it's very important to get this concept and this understanding of oral Torah get it down well. So we were talking about the fact that the oral Torah is the full body of Torah knowledge with all the rich details on how to perform the mitzvos and the details and the explanations of how everything works. That's the oral Torah, and it was given before the written Torah, and the written Torah came later, written down in written form. But how did that oral Torah get transmitted? So from the time that it was given, which was at Mount Sinai, 1313 BCE, for the next 1,500 years, it was transmitted orally. That means teacher to student. The student would spend minimum of 40 years apprenticing their master, their teacher, to acquire the full body of oral Torah, and then they would pass it down to their student, who would also apprentice them and study in their presence for 40 years before they could receive the full transmission of the oral Torah. That's how long it took generally. Now, the Torah being transmitted orally has pluses and minuses. The pluses, which I want to talk about today, are that when you're communicating it orally, see, Torah is supposed to be a living, breathing, organic system that can regulate and dictate and adjudicate in all situations, in all scenarios, in all times, in all places. Right? So in other words, the oral Torah should be as relevant to me living in 2021 in Deerfield as it may have been to a Jew living 500 years ago in Spain or 1,000 years ago in Babylon, etc. And when you allow the Torah to be orally transmitted, what the teacher can do is the teacher can take the principle of the oral Torah, the principle being taught or communicated, and modify it within the context of the examples that make sense for the student, and use examples and parables within the life experiences of the student, within the framework of the student, so that they will understand the idea and immediately be able to apply it. When you lock it in, when you solidify it in written form, then it gets frozen, it gets locked. So around 200 years after the Common Era, Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, Rabbi Judah the Prince, made the decision that the oral Torah was being forgotten. It was after the Romans had destroyed the temple, the second temple in Jerusalem. The Jews had been sent into the diaspora, and it was no longer possible for a student to apprentice by their Rebbe, by their teacher, for the full 40 years that they needed to be able to receive the transmission of oral Torah, and it was breaking down, and it was being lost, and it was being forgotten. So he codified it in written form. That written form is called the Mishnah. So what is the Mishnah? The Mishnah is the first codified, written down form of the oral Torah that was transmitted orally for 1,500 years until Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi wrote it down in the year 200. Now the problem with writing it down is now it's frozen. It's frozen in the Babylonian marketplace, for example. So in order for me to be able to understand what a Mishnah means, I have to be able to understand what a Babylonian marketplace looked like, and what their ovens looked like, and what type of animals they had, and what their homes looked like, and what their yards looked like. And it's very difficult. Okay, so the downside of writing down the Mishnah is it gets frozen, it gets locked into a specific time and place. And now it becomes very difficult to apply it to my contemporary modern life. But that was what was going on. There was a fear that it was going to be completely lost entirely. So Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi wrote it down. And now when we study oral Torah, we study the Mishnah, we study the written form of the oral Torah. The Gemara and the Talmud are further elaborations upon the Mishnah, but that's a discussion for another time. Tomorrow what I want to talk about is if the oral Torah was transmitted orally for 14 or 1,500 years, teacher to student, how did it not get broken down? How did it not get destroyed in that transmission? We've all played the game of broken telephone. Stay tuned. We'll talk about that tomorrow. Have a great day, everybody.